have committees, for those of you who are familiar with this. It was made, a decision was made by the board of direction that there are no longer councils or committees or task force. They're all called communities of interest, or COIs. I really can't explain to you why, so don't ask me. Ask Joe Shordell. But anyway, we now have the COI, and today we have a webinar. And as you can see on the screen, it has to do with building resilient infrastructure communities, or BRIC. And I'll let the presenters talk more about that. But a few introductory comments. First off, I want to talk about the next webinar. That'll happen in August. We're looking at the second or third week. We'll get the notice out a little bit in advance. We have who the speaker is. Her name is Joyce Coffey, and it'll be on public-private financing of infrastructure, particularly resilient infrastructure. So I hope you'll be looking forward to that. The other thing that I'd like to mention is we are in the middle of developing some new approaches to how these communities of interest, all of them that ASM is involved with, how they do business. So we have a request, I should say, to develop things called work plans, the activities each will be involved with. And we have a draft of those. Our final product is due to the board and to the national staff by the middle of July. But I have the draft of that information, and if anyone would like to review that draft, I'd be happy to send that out to you. At the end of this presentation today, you'll find the email address, my email address, and if you'll send me an email, I'll be happy to send you the draft and have you take a look at it and send it back with comments if you would like to do that. Or you can send it to Belle Fabreau, who's our staff contact, or if you know me any other way, we'll be happy to send you a copy and look for it. But I'll need the feedback from that by next week, the 17th of June, on Monday, so we can take and start consolidating the input. But the work plan is looking at things like educational opportunities, the number of events that this community of interest should be involved with, who we should be involved with, should we be involved with developing strategic alliances or partnerships, just what is it that we should be trying to do. We appreciate your input. The other item is that there is something called a strategic plan. I mean, SAME's had a strategic plan for the last 5 years, and there's a new strategic plan that's under development. If you've not seen it, again, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the current draft. Just send me an email and I'll send it back out to you. The last strategic plan had 4 goals. One of those had to do with resilience. The new draft strategic plan has 5 goals. The last of the goals is still on resilience. And it's not changed greatly, but in many ways, I think it's improved the wording. If you would like to see a copy and provide some feedback on that, our committee, our COI is not directly involved with the drafting, but if you'd like to see it and provide some feedback, I certainly would like to make a copy of that available to you. Finally, if you would like to be a member of this COI, send me an email. We have monthly meetings, they're conference calls, and then we have in-person meetings at the Small Business Conference, which is usually in November, and then at the JETSI. But then we have monthly conference calls to discuss the development of webinars, development of speakers lists, and some other activities where we try to share information about resilience activities and how we get this information, make this information available. If you'd like to be part of that process, just let me know. We'd be happy to have you added to the list. We have a much larger list of people that are involved or interested in resilience, and you may have been invited to this webinar because you're on that larger list, but aren't necessarily interested in the monthly engagement. That's great. There's kind of 2 levels, and we encourage people to be in one or the other. But if you'd like to be involved in the more active level, just let me know, and we'll be happy to add you to the list. With that, let's move on to the webinar, which is the reason you dialed in today, not for the advertisements that I just provided. Today we have go to the next slide, which is up. We have our agenda. So we just gave you the update. Going to the webinar. Then we're going to go to have a Q&A session, and then finally we're going to have a little bit of an overview about the Hampton Roads post and what they did for their streamers. We got the streamer for distinction. If you go back a slide, please, Belle, we have some housekeeping rules. Please mute your phones if you've not already done so. If you have a question, use your chat function that's on your GoToMeeting to send the question, and then we'll collect those questions for the Q&A session. During the presentation, everybody will be in listen-only mode so that everybody can hear and cut out the background noise. And this webinar is being recorded, so that it'll be available if you want to hear it later, or if you want somebody to share it, to listen to it and missed it, they can go to the COI website, a web page on the SAMB website, and they can listen to it at that time. So next slide, please. Our moderator for today is Commander Janice Vaccaro, U.S. Public Health Service. Janice works with FEMA. Her resume is on the slide. She's a member of our community of interest, and she's the one who put together the speakers and the presentation. And as you can see, she's been actively involved in the radiological, chemical, and biological community for quite a while. And I want to thank her for all her efforts in pulling all this together. And with that, I'd like to turn the session over to Janice to introduce our two speakers. So Janice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joe. On behalf of the FEMA Resilience team, thank you for your time, everyone's time today. I'm going to be introducing our speakers from the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration, also known as FEMA, which is part of FEMA. I'm part of the national, within Resilience, also the National Preparedness Division, and I want to make a small plug for, on behalf of the agency's renewed effort for our preparedness development. There's a link on the slide that's up right now. We are updating the National Response Framework to incorporate lessons learned from 2017 hurricane and wildfire season. If you look in my bio there, I mentioned my time in Puerto Rico. I know a lot of the folks on the phone and in the room here were impacted during that 2017 season. Coming out of that, not only did we have the Disaster Recovery Reform Act, which led to the program that we're talking about today, but we also are updating the National Response Framework, which for many of you, you know, talks about how our nation responds to all types of disasters and emergencies. This next version of the NRF is going to be the 4th edition, and it's going to reflect the relationships and highlight those relationships among business, industry, and infrastructure. I really want to emphasize our open comment period. If you go to that link, which is off the FEMA website, it's the FEMA.gov and then National Planning Frameworks, where we've got a new emergency support function, ESF 14, which is called the Cross-Sector Business and Infrastructure Annex, and it helps sector-specific agencies, including our emergency support functions, or known as ESFs, and our partners coordinate across cross-sector. And I think that given the folks on the phone right now, we'd really like to get both our whole community partners' input on that outreach. So I'm going to say shameless plug for that, but without further ado, let's talk about building resilient infrastructure and communities, or BRIC. I'm going to just turn this over to Kim Rogers, who's our BRIC team lead, and her colleague, Nick Ruley. And without further ado, Kim, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. If we can go to, I believe it's slide 8. Yes, that's Nick. Thank you. So yes, thank you very much, Janice, for that great introduction. I'm very pleased to be with you all this just after noon webinar, and to speak to you a little bit about the history of where we are with housing mitigation assistance, and then more importantly, where we're going to be going in the future with the new Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, which was developed under Section 1234 of the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. Slide 9. So first I want to talk to you a little bit about the challenges. I know most of you realize that us as a nation have been facing some major disasters, especially since 2017. It seems like almost daily we're dealing with tornadoes, the wildfires that are now out in California. We have some more. We've got daily flooding going on, and it's basically putting people at risk constantly. And the severity seems to be increasing these disasters, and it's putting more people into vulnerable areas. So in the past 5 years alone, there have been hundreds of these events that have impacted communities coast to coast. Slide 10. And what that has basically done is it's basically shown the rise in disaster costs. So you can see by this chart, years with major disasters like Hurricane Sandy in 2012, which is approximately the right side of your screen, and Harvey, Irma, and Maria that we had in 2017 show a little bit of the outliers, but even though they have hurricanes, Sandy, Harvey, Irma, and Maria in there, the trend is still showing an increase. There's a number of large-scale disasters that we've had, and it's just on the rise. We don't see that trend going down, which means that hundreds of billions of dollars are being spent annually to respond to and recover from these disasters. As a matter of fact, in 2018, we actually estimated that the disaster costs had already reached about $50 billion, and that we haven't even reached our hurricane season completely. I mean, we've just started it on June 1st, but we've already put out about $50 billion in disaster costs. Slide 11. So I'm putting my shameless plug in for mitigation. The good news that we have is that mitigation has been proven to save dollars. The tools that we have available now to mitigate the losses is phenomenal. In 2018, we marked the 30-year anniversary since the passing of the Robert T. Stafford Act, which is basically the legislative vehicle that we have for emergency assistance. And then it was also amended in 1974 to include funding for HMGP, which is helps communities after disasters. And we're pretty confident that these types of activities are definitely making a difference. A NIBS study was done, as you can see by this chart. A National Institute of Building Sciences study was developed in 2007 originally, which showed a 4-to-1 for every $4 we spent. For every dollar we spent, we had $4 of savings. Recently, in 2017, we had an interim study that was done that showed not only the crucial role that mitigation played, but that the research showed more like a 6-to-1 savings, specifically overall. But if you look at the chart, you can see that in specific areas, the dollar amounts are actually different, which shows with hurricane surge, you can see a 7-to-1, wind is 5-to-1, and earthquake 4-to-1. So it definitely shows that mitigation saves. And investing in this, making changes actually makes sense, and it pays off. Slide 12, please. So for the last 30 years, and I know my bio went by really fast, but I've been with FEMA for 30 years. So I've seen a lot of the changes that have been made since the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program was developed and these new programs that have come about. So we've had many disaster and non-disaster grant programs come out. The Hazard Mitigation Grant Program its original purpose was to help communities implement mitigation after a presidential disaster declaration. And believe it or not, we've been sitting here, we hear constantly from communities that they're very thankful for what comes in after disaster, not just for individual assistance and public assistance, but also hazard mitigation assistance. So we've been doing that for about 30 years now. In 1994, we had the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program was developed, and it was basically to provide grants for mitigation planning and projects that basically reduced risk and reduced or eliminated risk for damages to structures that were insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. So it was really restricted in the fact that it would only dealt with flooding, and it only dealt with structures that were insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. In 2000, with the passing of the Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000, the Pre-Disaster Mitigation Program was born. And this was meant to be a pre-disaster program complementing the post-disaster HMGP program. Basically, it was funding that was appropriated by Congress that would give money to states and communities in the pre-disaster environment to reduce risk, also to lives and structures. Slide 13. So this is a slide that shows in FY 2018, this is how much money we actually provided to communities and states and tribes and territories in the pre and post-disaster environment to reduce risk. So over the 30-year history, these three programs provided more than $15 billion to fund mitigation projects. In fiscal year 2018 alone, we delivered $1.3 billion in pre and post-disaster grants. So as you can see, a percentage of it, majority of the percentage of it goes to the hazard mitigation grant, was put out by the hazard mitigation grant program, 59%, which is about $784 million. The next amount is 30% went to the 406 mitigation funding, which is for, following disasters. It's doing small projects that are little mitigation activities, but not full reconstructions like elevations and things like that. These are to public buildings only. Then 7% of the funding went to FMA, and then 4% was given out by PDM. So presently, over $350 million has approved to support mitigation projects in the wake of Hurricane Irma and Maria, and there's still many more projects that are out there, but we're working through those projects one at a time to make sure that they meet all the requirements that we have. So these numbers alone demonstrate it's an extraordinary interest in our grant programs, and in fact, our competitive programs seem to be consistently oversubscribed every year. For instance, in FY 18, we had $249 million for the pre-disaster mitigation grant program, and we received almost $515 million for that funding. So the money is definitely sought after. It's now we're in the process of how do we change what we're doing from this large appropriation to show that we can lay the groundwork for new priorities that have passed in this legislation under DRRA, to lay the groundwork to shift this paradigm towards emphasizing these opportunities that we could be taking, which is where you all come in. Slide 14. I know many of you have seen probably FEMA's strategic plan. One of the pieces that really feeds into why DRRA passed and where we focus is on building a culture of preparedness and reducing the complexity of FEMA. So we as an agency, the leadership spoke in depth about where FEMA, our agency's mission is going, and to fulfill its mission of helping people before, during, and after disasters. That was one of the major reasons why DRRA passed, is because at the heart of this plan is the recognition that mitigation is a critical action, and that we need to take, and we need to take this action to build resilience and prepare the nation for when disasters strike, because we know that disasters are not going to stop. Slide 15. So on October 5th, 2018, President Trump signed the Disaster Recovery Reform Act. And what the legislation was intended to do was to introduce and address the rising costs of disasters, and to reform the federal programs that are affected by DRRA. The act established more than 50 new authorities and requirements for FEMA, FEMA-wide. Of that, 15 fell within the Federal Insurance and Mitigation Administration. And by implementing these, I should say 15, there were 13 that actually were FEMA-wide, and 13 of them were really ones that we actually had to act upon. 2 of them are ones that we have interest in. By implementing these provisions, FEMA will not only be able to ensure our communities are better prepared for disasters, but also be able to make progress towards achieving the 3 strategic goals that I just mentioned. Slide 16. This is just a little snapshot of some of the provisions that you can see. The one that is starred is the one that we really want to get into. One of the discussions that I want to mention here for us is that, we're in the process of putting this Building Resilient Infrastructure and Community program together. We have not developed it. So Section 1234 talks about a national public infrastructure pre-disaster hazard mitigation section. What that is the actual title that the section within the DRRA stated. We as an agency talked about, do we want to put out a program that's called National Public Infrastructure Pre-Disaster Hazard Mitigation, or do we really want to come up with what this truly is? What Section 1234 did was change Section 203 of the Robert Stafford Act, where the pre-disaster mitigation program currently resides, and designed this new program. It gave us additional information of how we should develop this program that is going to be a bigger, better PDM. Slide 17. So this is what section DRRA Section 1234 is. So so we're calling it, again, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities Program, or we fondly call it BRIC. Although all of the provisions that came in DRRA will help FEMA, further its strategic goals to create a culture of preparedness, we believe that BRIC provides a more game-changing opportunity to transform PDM, the PDM grant program, by establishing a more reliable stream of funding. And it does this by leveraging a 6% set-aside mechanism based on annual disaster relief fund expenditures, which I'll get into in just a little bit. And it also establishes a new nationwide competitive mitigation grant program. As you can see by the chart that's listed, the PDM grant program originally was not well funded. It was kind of up and down. We would get 100 million one year, we'd get 50 million another year. It went down to 25 at one point, which was very difficult for states to make commitments to do good mitigation activities because the funding was never very consistent. So what the change in the leveraging of the 6% did was actually provide the possibility of consistent funding. We also have the ability to encourage community-wide mitigation around critical lifelines. This is something that we've never really focused on before, truly focused on, but we'll be working towards that. Also prioritizing resilient infrastructure type projects, which again, we have done infrastructure projects in the past, but never pushed to prioritize them because we've never really had enough money to do so. So again, you know, we here in HMA at FEMA are really working hard to design a program that, based on the ongoing feedback that we receive from you all as stakeholders, and our experience with, you know, other grant programs that we've dealt with, we'll be able to focus on how BRIC can encourage these community-wide mitigation activities that are meant to reduce risk to infrastructure, and then basically helping states to improve their capability and capacity. Slide 18. So historically under PDM, as I said, we funded a whole bunch of things, and this is from the inception of PDM within this chart. A lot of what we funded was mitigation planning and then home buyouts and retrofits. So you see a lot of money over the years going towards this, these amounts, but historically the top 5 have not been these infrastructure type projects. So reasons for this, you know, we may include the annual appropriations. Again, we don't have the annual appropriations like we expected. We also have the varying priorities by states, tribes, and territories, because ultimately they're the ones that make the decisions on what projects to submit to us, or the inability to actually meet the 25% non-federal cost share. So we've only in the past, if we looked at it, about 75 million in the utilities has actually been for PDM, for resilient infrastructure. So we decided that in 2018, when we received the largest amount of money under for our appropriation, that we wanted to do something for resilient infrastructure, not knowing a whole bunch about what we could do or couldn't do. So we put out $100 million dedicated to resilient infrastructure. And actually we did increased our federal share to a $10 million project, understanding that $10 million to some cities and some communities could be not a lot of money, but in some, that could be quite a bit. So we were very, very impressed by what we received. We actually received almost $160 million in infrastructure projects requests for that $100 million. So we're showing that the upward trajectory actually suggests that the focus on pre-disaster mitigation will continue its shift as we move towards infrastructure protection in the future. Another piece of importance we are understanding more is that a lot of infrastructure has a tendency not to be owned by local government. A lot of it is private or could be for-profit companies who are not actually eligible to apply directly to FEMA. So it's working on the importance of partnerships to actually build this resilience. So as we move forward, focusing on these infrastructure projects, we're trying to ensure that we can work with our local governments and our local counterparts to consider working together to with other entities to do good mitigation, even if it's not the government that is actually owning the property itself. And this is also very true in like our transportation systems. A lot of our utilities have a tendency to be public. Slide 19. So where are we going from here? Since the approval of BRIC, we've been doing the best we can to engage as many of our stakeholders as possible, which is why we were excited when Janice came to us and asked if we were willing to do a webinar on BRIC. And we said, of course, because we wanted to get as much input as possible. We are in the process of doing stakeholder engagement, research, and policy development at this point. We are looking for input from you all to do brainstorming and giving us as much information that we can as possible to show us, you know, what should we be thinking about. These are things that we just don't understand and don't have a lot of, we just don't have a lot of experience in doing this type of event. So we'll be using all this information from this webinar plus others that we're giving to help us build the program. So when, you know, the questions you have and the questions we have, we'll be trying to get some good feedback so that we can ensure that we're designing a program that's going to be used. It's actually going to build resilient infrastructure. Slide 20. And another piece of this is the component is looking at lifelines. Our agency is looking for us to consider lifelines when we introduce our topic of what BRIC 10 funds. And I just want to go quickly through this concept and how we're thinking we could use it as we develop BRIC. So the multiple large-scale and high-impact disasters that have occurred across geographically dispersed jurisdictions in 2017 had us really looking rapidly for decision-making and prioritization to ensure that populations, survivor populations had basically the basic resources they needed to survive. And this posed some major challenges for us as an agency and for our other federal agencies. So as a result of the lessons learned from 2017 in Harvey, Irma, and Maria, we realized that we needed to think differently and operationally prioritize how we responded. So we looked at things like these lifelines. So consequently, the community lifelines construct was introduced, and it was basically codified in an after action report. And lifelines provide an indispensable service that enables us to be able to continuously operate critical businesses and government functions that are essential to human safety and health. So we're trying to make sure that when we think of resilient infrastructure, we're trying to think of them along a lifeline aspect. So as we work through developing our process and our policy and the actual program itself, up to the eventual notice of funding opportunity, we're going to be taking into account various considerations that are introduced by lifelines themselves and large infrastructure. For instance, what types of projects should we be doing and how these components translate into the project. Also, is there innovation that we should be looking at, co-benefits that could be surfacing? One piece that we always talk about is a period of performance for how long it takes to do the project. Normally, we say it's 3 years. Are we really truly thinking that 3 years is going to be long enough to do a large infrastructure project, even though it could be more like a traditional project? They still need more time to plan for and complete the project. So what things do we need to be doing and exploring to see how we can support communities as they do these projects? offering project scoping or advanced assistance where we're actually providing funding to communities to help them start out the upfront planning to say, what is it that we want to do? What documentation do we need to actually develop a project, so that we're going into this thinking holistically, really looking at the private sector ownership, because again, as I mentioned, the private sector plays a major role in the ownership, maintenance, and operation of many of these lifelines. So even though we can't give grants directly to private organizations, we need to make sure that we're generating innovative solutions so that we can partner with these stakeholders. Also looking into new technical considerations where we're focusing on infrastructure and lifeline projects that will all need to retool a bit of what we're doing to ensure that we're prepared to implement them, and not just from a technical standpoint, but also the technical assistance that we would need to provide to our partners to do this. Funding caps and the role of planning. Like I said, we upped the dollar amount that we provided, or we're going to provide, for infrastructure projects, but we heard from many cities that $10 million is not enough. If you want to give us an infrastructure project, we're looking at $100 million. On a $250 million cap, we're not really sure where we would go from there. And then also looking at other opportunities like green infrastructure. What could we do that's different? Slide 21, please. This is just an example of one of our resilient lifeline projects that came in. And this actually had PA 406 mitigation. This is New York's Langone Medical Center. They had already taken, have started taking a lifeline approach to mitigation. So the center experienced significant damage as a result of Hurricane Sandy. Not only did the flooding hamper its ability to serve the community, but a power failure from the flooding caused loss of years of cancer research and millions of dollars. So the university responded by developing and implementing a holistic campus-wide mitigation strategy that included public assistance, 406 mitigation, HMGP, to minimize the impacts of similar and future events. So they constructed a flood barrier to shield the campus, and they also did funding for a cogeneration plant to protect the center's power supply so that they would not lose the medical research and treatment that was going on. So these activities use mitigation funding to safeguard the lifeline pertaining to the health and medical facilities, as well as energy and safety and security. So this is something that we, when we develop BRIC, are thinking about doing the same thing. You know, we'd like to see more projects like this, so we need to know what we need to do to encourage this type of project. Example. Slide 22. So PDM and BRIC, this is where we are in our path forward. We received PDM funding, and we're trying to focus our shift from legacy PDM program to BRIC. So in FY18, we had $250 million total actually for PDM, and we're looking towards FY19. We received money from Congress to do a legacy program, and we're looking to do the similar projects that we had and similar priorities under FY19 that we had under FY18, only we're putting out additional funding for resilient infrastructure. But what we're looking to do is to build BRIC in FY20. The total amount is going to be determined. That is through the 6% set aside that we receive from prior disasters. That's the discussion that I mentioned prior. The money that we receive is actually set on the prior year's disasters. Once the disaster happens and the PA and IA costs are developed, we get 6% of the 6-month lock-in dollar amount. So the money could actually fluctuate. However, we recognize that the rising cost of disasters, that the potential is that we could have a large program. So as I said, we're in the process of developing BRIC for FY20, and we're looking forward to more stakeholder engagement because we have a lot of work ahead of us to design and implement this grant program so that it meaningfully reduces risk and supports our states and communities. So we're really excited about where this new program can go, but we're looking for, again, a lot of stakeholder feedback to help us to develop something that's as meaningful as it can be to reduce risk and increase the investments to increase resilience across all hazards. So this is where you all come in. Slide 23. What we're doing now is this engagement. We have a lot of people that we're trying to engage. We have a lot of input that we need from critical stakeholders like you all to help ensure that what we're doing is benefiting communities across the country through meaningful mitigation. We have these opportunities that we can go to like conferences and workshops, but I think the best feedback we've had so far has been through community like webinars, but also webinars with our stakeholders like you all, because it helps us to ask questions and hopefully get questions from you all that help stir our thinking so that we're not forgetting things. We have an idea scale, and you'll see on your screen it says the FEMA.ideascale.com. There are multiple, we have broken out an idea scale into major sections: risk, infrastructure, resilience, funding, capability and capacity, what does lifelines mean, planning, and a lot of questions that we're asking for input on. So if anything I can leave with you today is if you have some time to go in and look at our idea scale and provide some feedback, that would be great, because we don't have, it's one thing to get a perspective from our state hazard mitigation officers and emergency management. It's great to get feedback from our tribes and our territories and stuff, but when we get feedback from specific groups like engineers and architects, it helps to have good discussion. It gives us opportunity to rethink things that we have maybe not thought about before. Also, we have a BRIC mailbox. It's called Build BRIC at FEMA.dhs.gov. What this does is this helps us with, it's a non-return email, but what it can do is if you've got any ideas, just pitch them in an email, send them to us, and we'll add it to all of our engagement so we can put them in our policy buckets, and helps us with helping to draft, again, the program itself. And with that, slide 24 is the end of the presentation, where we can go into some discussion.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead, Janice.
Okay, now I was just going to thank Kim and Nick for these slides and the presentation. And I see Lieutenant Simpson's question about whether the slides will be available for reference, and the answer is yes. I believe the slides will go out as a PDF from SAME. I'm just going to open it up. Joe, do we have some time for some questions and answers?
Well, we have about 5 minutes. We're running short on time now, so we end at 1300. So.
All right, sounds good. All right, we've got a question that came in. Can this funding be used in conjunction with community partnerships programs for resilience? And I'm looking at Nick and Kim, if you wanted to jump in on that.
Yeah, I was actually trying to get myself off mute. Sorry. I was trying to look at the chat and it was going the wrong direction. So the funding that we have is, it's grant funding. So it can be used on a distinct part of that, but it cannot be used as match. How does, and I'm just want to make sure I'm in the right place. So our funding is not on match. It's actually a grant funding itself. If the Community Partnerships Program for Resilience keeps its a federal identity or non-federal identity, and I apologize, I'm not sure what the Community Partnerships Program is. If it's a non-federal program, then it can be used in conjunction. If it's a federal program, it needs to be, distinct pieces need to be, like a scope of work and a budget need to be used for those each.
Okay.
And I think he lost his audio. It says he did.
We have time for another question.
And again, I encourage everyone to start looking at some of the, if they want, the idea scale, because we want to know what, you all as engineers think when you talk about infrastructure. What are things that you consider for infrastructure dollar-wise? Are we talking grand dollar amounts or smaller dollar amounts? Time frame for doing projects? Are you talking a 3 years? Do you think something like 5 years? These are things that we as grants folks don't know all the information that we think we do. And I think that's why we're looking at more information for people to give us input. Are there any resilience community ideas that you have tried in the past and have failed, ideas you may not consider? We haven't had, I can tell you that some of the projects that we have received in the past for resilient and community infrastructure projects, we have received flood projects like this one. We also, this past year for FY18, received a project that came in from Hoboken, New Jersey, where they were actually did an undergrounding wastewater and freshwater, what they called a resilience park. And it actually took every bit of the water that was from runoff and filtered it underground, and then going to allow it to be reused. But above ground, it's going to be a park for tennis courts, skateboarding, and playgrounds, things like that. So that's something that's innovative and different that we had seen. I think our biggest concern is getting things to pass a benefit cost analysis, which we are working on doing some different things for that.
Okay. All right. I think we're probably going to have to stop there. I want to thank our presenters for a very good overview. It was really interesting. It gives us a good background of what FEMA is doing in mitigation. So thank you very much. I want to move to the very last. We got about 8 minutes, and I want to turn to Mike Pempalone. Mike, are you on the line?
Mike needs to unmute himself, Joe.
Yep. Okay, so Mike is going to talk about the Hampton Roads Post and some of the activities that they did this in 2018 to earn the distinguished streamer in resilience. And so if Mike can unmute his phone, we will move on to that. If not, we may not move on to it. So not hearing anything. While we're waiting, I just sent a note out. PDH credits are available for this. Bill, I think you have email addresses for people that signed in. Is that correct? Through the GoToMeeting?
Yes, I can recover those from there, yes.
You can recover those, so we can send out the PDH certificates. As I mentioned, we can, for those that are interested, we can send out the work plans, strategic plans for those who want to know more about what we're doing, or comment on what the community of interest is up to. So Mike sent a note saying, sorry, yeah, *6 will unmute your phone, Mike. Or maybe it won't.
Unfortunately, I don't know where Mike is because his name's not on here. So yeah, there's too many to distinguish which one is Mike.
Okay.
So what we're going to do, we're going to unmute everybody. So could you make sure that all your mobile devices or however you've connected to this webinar today, you will mute on your own, and then we're going to unmute everybody from the live feed. So here goes.
All right. So Mike, you able to speak, connect?
Hello, Joe. Are you taking questions now?
Well, we were trying to get Mike Pampalone to talk about his Hampton Roads post as we finish up our last 5 minutes. Mike, you there? Guess not.
Mike Webb.
I think it's not. So we got a question?
Joe, this is Stephen Stafford. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Resilience Chair from Orange County Post, Melody Engineer, been member for 38 years, and I've been actually a life member for 50-some years for ASC. Their ASC report card shows almost $5 trillion efficiency. The only time I have seen in my lifetime a president coming up that want to really focus on infrastructure, $1 trillion, that's President Trump. And I think I noticed that Kim showed the PDM, pre-disaster mitigation budget is a little better than this new administration. And that's good news. I think personally that we have not done enough to maintain or remove the possibility of upcoming disaster by mitigating it early enough. A lot of areas that we really know it is needed. And actually one example I want to say that the Army Corps of Engineers were so good in trying to take care of the to-be disaster, which it became the Katrina levees, and the mayor did not fund $20 million. Unfortunately, we spent $180 billion, 9,100 times more money after the fact. So that shows PDM is really great, but a lot of agencies are not doing. ASCVR, SAME, we are apolitical, but I don't know. I work for the governor of California and FEMA, also incident command, trained as a volunteer when I'm a structural engineer licensed, many states, and I can help. But, you know, I found out that they're not listening to us. And I think SAME has done a lot more, but we are apolitical. We cannot voice out too many political politicians. And I think the PDM, I want to make sure Kim confirms that we have more funding with new administration PDM now than ever before. Am I correct?
So Kim, the question is, do we have more funding now than we did?
Yes.
Sorry,
PDM,
I had to unmute myself. Sorry. Yes, yes, we do. So in the last 2 years, we've received $250 million each year. So it's $500 million that we've received just in the last 2 fiscal years, which is it's equivalent to everything that we received since the first time we received money in 2003.
Kim, I think FEMA has the power really to really preach out, tell everybody out there, for God's sake, take care of things before we can help you that. And agencies have to pull out, do this. We spend money on, and I wrote a letter to the governor of California. He's gone now for 16 years, 2 times. And I tell you, we have 678 dams in California, Oroville Dam being repaired. We were negligent on repairing it before it happens. And the governor wrote to President Trump that wanted $100 billion to fix infrastructure. I saw the list. He did not have Oroville Dam in it. which is a shame. These are the examples I'm telling Kim that I think FEMA may be looking in some area, letting these people that wake up and do something before it happens. And I'm 80 years old now. I've lived there for so many years. I see things happening. They could have taken care of it. And now Katrina is one example. Please notice that we had 300,000 homes became uninhabitable because the mayor did not move fast enough. I don't know why. I don't understand that. They play politics. I heard them on the news all the time. We all did. That, blame George Bush to that. But the FEMA says the first responder should be the mayor or local agency, not the federal. So they have not done that. Are we talking about these? Can we preach that to the agencies? Move up. Don't repeat Katrina's example. I honestly believe I wanted to say my 2 cents in here now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your feedback. I think FEMA has a new tool here to move forward with, and I believe that they're looking for some feedback. And I encourage everyone to provide your input as Kim has asked to try and improve this new program. So I believe we've reached the end of our time. I don't believe we're able to get Mike Pampalone, the post president for Hampton Roads, on the line to explain what they did in 2018. That's a shame, but we'll try again. Remember, our next webinar will be in August. I want to thank everybody for your participation today. Thank everybody from FEMA who joined us today for your assistance. Janice and Kim and Nick for joining us and for all you're doing at FEMA. And I especially want to thank Belle from the SAME staff for setting up this call. So thank you all for your attention to resilience. You all have a great day.